Hey there, it's me again at the end of week 3 of this league in Path of Exile. I've been playing Cast When Stunned, and I know that everyone is asking for the build video. As a call out, this build is not my own creation. I'm following a lot of the hard work put in by eMiracle into making this what it is today. So, in this video, I want to go over the gear, I want to go over the passive tree, and I want to talk about why everything works. Let's get started. This is the passive tree. The first thing to call out is that you're a chieftain. Let's look at that first. Chieftain gives us both offensive and defensive layers. Let's start with defense. Tessalio Cleansing Water allows Fire Res to also apply to Cold and Lightning Res at 50% values. This means that you can now just stack Fire Res and get Cold and Lightning Res for free, which is great. Next up is Velako Storm's Embrace, which makes Max Fire Res also apply to Max Cold and Lightning Res. This is also great because it means you just need to scale Max Fire Res. This build does go for 90% all res as a result of just these two notables. As for offensive layers, we've got Ramako Sun's Light, where nearby enemy monsters' fire resistance against damage over time is minus 20% while you're stationary. You literally just pop and ignite on an enemy and stand there and watch them burn. Then there's Hinakura Death's Fury. This is the bread and butter of this build. When you kill enemies, they have a 5% chance to explode, dealing 500% of their maximum life as damage. This large damage is going to be able to cause a large ignite, which is damage over time, and enemies are just going to die. Now let's take a look at the rest of the tree. The main things to note here are that we're taking a lot of jewel sockets. This build loves jewels, so we're gonna path in a way that gets us near jewel sockets. Here are all the jewels I'm using. We've got Storm Shroud to get ailment immunity to all ailments, which is great. On rare jewels, we're mainly looking for max life and a combination of res, max res, and attributes. On this one, I've got +2 max fire res, which remember applies to Golden Lightning as well. Other things you'll look for are fire dot multi and just regular dot multi. Next up, I've got Watcher's Eye, which has a double mod when you're affected by Malevolence. In this case, I am running Malevolence, spoiler alert, so that means that I'm unaffected by bleeding and I get +20% dot multi. This is just damage. Next up, the Light of Meaning Jewel. Passive skills in radius also grant 6% increased fire damage. There are a lot of passives in range that I'm taking where I'm placing this jewel, so I'm getting a decent amount of fire damage from this. Then for the bread and butter of this build, you've got Blood Notch. This build is cast when stunned. You're going to be stunned all the time. Blood Notch is going to trigger all the time, and it's just going to help you recover life. Getting at least 50% on a Blood Notch means you won't need to roll recoup on other jewels and can just rely on this and the rest of your recoup from the tree. Another common jewel to go with this build is Immutable Force. The roll on this doesn't really matter. It goes between 500 and 1000%. There is a breakpoint at like 970 something, but it just changes the number of frames that you're stunned for by a little bit. Just following the path of the passive tree, you'll notice we're taking a lot of life. We're taking strength, which is more life. And feeding into that, we're also taking the life masteries. If you take all 6 life masteries, this top one gives you 10% more max life. More is the keyword here versus increased in other sources, which means that this is multiplicative with other sources of life, which means you get a ton of life just from this mastery alone. Another thing we're scaling in this build is the maximum number of endurance charges you can have. Endurance charges are great for damage reduction, so we're gonna take this notable down here, this notable over here, and this notable up here for +3 maximum endurance charges just from the tree. Another key feature about this build, I have no mana, and that's because I'm running Blood Magic. Blood Magic removes all mana, it gives me 10% more max life, there's that more keyword again, and skills will cost and reserve life instead of mana, which is why my life pool has reserved life. Since I'm reserving life, reservation efficiency is pretty important, and I do path to the reservation mastery as well as Champion of the Cause. Champion of the Cause is also nice because it just gives aura effect, and I am running some auras. The unfaltering cluster along with the stun mastery means that I won't get affected by critical strikes if I've been stunned recently, so as soon as I take a first hit, I'm immune to crits. I also get a decent amount of recoup from stunning hits, same as Blood Notch. Here's where I have the Light of Meaning Jewel, and you can see there's a decent number of passive nodes in here that I've allocated, which means I'm getting increased fire damage for each of them. Also over here, I've rune grafted the Bound rune graft so that I get increased bonuses from my gloves and reduced from my boots. We'll look at gear soon. One of the staples of any build running Righteous Fire, which I am running, is that we take the Fire Mastery. Regenerate 1 life per second for each 1% uncapped fire resistance. Since I am stacking fire resistance, this is going to give me regen, it's going to give me fire res, it's going to give me hold res, and it's going to give me lightning res. That's pretty nice. The last really important thing about this tree is that I'm running 3 large clusters. This one up here has Doriani's Lesson and Burning Bright as the notables that I care about. Doriani's Lesson gives me some leech, and Burning Bright gives burning damage and area of effect. And you want area of effect because this build has explosions, it's got circles. Big circle is better circle. On the other 2 clusters, I've opted for Burning Bright and Widespread Destruction. Burning Bright, again, more AoE and burning damage, and Widespread Destruction, even more AoE and elemental damage. Clusters are typically a pretty big source of damage, but in this case, I also am using them to get just a little bit more in the way of chaos resistance and attributes. The reason I care so much about attributes is that this build is a little bit intelligence and dexterity starved, which is necessary for some of the gems that we're running. I'm also running 2 medium clusters. I've got this one here, which is a burning damage cluster with Wrapped in Flame and Burning Bright. Burning Bright is the same thing that's on the large cluster, just burning damage and area of effect. Wrapped in Flame covers enemies in ash, which is huge because it makes them move slower and they take increased fire damage for 4 seconds. My other medium cluster is an area damage cluster, and I am taking Assert Dominance and Towering Threat. Assert Dominance increases my area of effect by 25% if I've killed at least 5 enemies recently, which is typically true because I'm not typically doing boss fights, and Towering Threat just gives me more life and more area of effect. Just super nice jewel to have. Let's get into the skills. On my bar right now, I've got Penance Mark, Shield Charge, Frost Blink, Righteous Fire, Vitality, Flesh and Stone, Petrified Blood, and Malevolence. Fire Trap is a personal choice. I just like being able to throw traps around when I'm not doing anything else. Shield Charge and Frost Blink are movement abilities. They allow me to move around quickly in a map even though I might not be the fastest boy around just running. Righteous Fire is this giant circle of burning around me, and this is where all that AoE comes in. It gives me a big circle. Righteous Fire is used to kill enemies. This is because you don't really have much actual DPS until you start killing enemies and getting those ignites on other enemies. Vitality gives you life regen. This is good, particularly because you're running Righteous Fire. Other than being your primary damage dealer to start that ignite chain reaction, Righteous Fire also just grants you more spell damage. So for other abilities in this build, you just get more damage by being set on fire. Flesh and Stone and Petrified Blood are defensive layer buffs that I'm running, which allow me to not die as much. Flesh and Stone, while in Sand Stance, is just straight up less damage from enemies in the aura. Petrified Blood makes it so that damage dealt is dealt as damage over time, and some of that damage is just straight up prevented. The last aura I'm running is Malevolence. This just gives a lot more dot multi. Now let's move on to the items. What am I running here? For the weapon, I've got the Dark Seer. This weapon is possibly best in slot for this build, although some might argue that a rare scepter that is crafted with dot multi and fire dot multi could be better. I like the Dark Seer because it gives level to all spell skill gems, which includes your auras. It also gives 2 max life per level. I'm level 100. That means that this is giving me 200 flat life. That's a lot of life. It also gives enemies Malediction. Malediction makes enemies deal less damage and take more damage. This is just nice to have. Finally, I've enchanted it with quality granting area of effect. Again, we love AoE. We love making the big circles. More AoE is good. Moving on to the shield. This shield is a rare crafted shield. I made this following one of eMiracle's guides. It probably ended up costing me about 40 div. Every stat on this shield is useful, other than arguably the chance to block. Life is useful because it makes Righteous Fire do more damage and gives you more life. +3 max fire res applies to fire and cold and lightning res, so you just get a lot more max res. 8% additional fizz damage reduction speaks for itself. And finally, socketed gems having increased reservation efficiency and +2 level of socketed support gems means, of course, that I'm running Flesh and Stone and Petrified Blood in my shield, supported by a level 5 Enlighten, 2 levels just from the item. All of this reservation efficiency means that my life globe actually has some room between the 50% mark from Petrified Blood and where my reservation lies. This makes things like Leech really good because I never hit full life. I always have that gap. Moving right along, I'm wearing Defiance of Destiny. This is an amazing amulet when you're expecting to be hit, and because this build is called Cast When Stunned, you're gonna get hit. Gain 24% of missing unreserved life before being hit by an enemy. This means that even if you have 1 HP, if an enemy hits you, you're gonna gain 24% of your life back and then take the damage. Also, because I have so much reservation efficiency, the amount that the 24% is calculated off of is larger than it otherwise would be, which is great. Finally, the anointment I have on here is Defiled Forces. You may have seen this when I had my passive tree open. This mainly refreshes the duration of ignites on enemies you curse. The reason why this is important is because once you get an ignite on an enemy, you can make it last until that enemy dies. This is super useful, especially when you have to fight bosses. P.S. Try not to have to fight bosses. Moving on to the helmet. The implicits, more AoE, and fizz taken as fire. Of course we're taking fizz taken as because we've got 90% LE res. This means anything that we can force into LE damage, we're taking less of it. AoE is just great. I've got a fractured base here with life regeneration rate because life regen is a really good defensive layer. My helmet link is also where I've got Righteous Fire, and so of course I've got more LE damage just so that the burn works better, and +1 level of socketed AoE gems and increased area of effect to make that circle even bigger. Here's my Righteous Fire gem, and of course I have it supported by Elemental Focus support, increased area of effect support, and burning damage support. Moving on to the chest, I'm wearing a Cloak of Flame that is double corrupted with reduced fire damage and chaos damage taken. The chaos damage is really nice because I'm not scaling max chaos res, so having reduced damage taken is really good. The reduced fire damage taken is also very good because all of my fizz taken as is fizz taken as fire specifically. So being able to reduce that even further is great. The reason why Cloak of Flame is perfect for this build is because it gives fire res, which gives all res. It has increased ignite duration, which is just nice to have. And it gives 40% fizz taken as fire, which is great. Valerium, Moonstone Ring. This is the reason this build works. Stun threshold is based on energy shield instead of life. This build does not run energy shield. This means that your stun threshold is pretty close to 0. Enemies hitting you will almost always stun you. This ring does give some energy shield, but really 36 is nothing when compared to the fact that this build has 8,200 unreserved life. I also have a corrupted implicit that I cannot be poisoned. This is great because even though Storm Shroud protects me from elemental ailments, poison is not an elemental ailment, so I need to be immune to it if I want to not die. Next up is the Hateful Accuser. Ignore the quality on this ring. I was just messing around with some catalysts earlier in the league and I haven't touched it since. There's only really one reason you use this ring, and it's because it grants level 20 Penance Mark, which I didn't really talk about earlier. Penance Mark curses a single enemy, causing them to spawn multiple phantasms when hit. The reason why this is super nice is A, you're cursing an enemy, which makes Defiled Forces proc and keep that ignite duration going, and B, you're spawning enemies. This means you've got more things to kill, and more things to kill means more things to ignite, and more things to potentially blow up and deal large amounts of damage and deal even bigger ignites. This is particularly useful when you're just on a single target. When you are facing a single target, if you don't have other enemies, then you just have to rely on Righteous Fire to slowly whittle away their health. And that's not fun for anyone. For my gloves, my Eldritch Implicits give fire exposure on hit, which is nice because that means I don't have to get it some other way. And more importantly, ignite to inflict spread to other enemies within 1.4 meters. This I should probably scale higher, but I'm not really going to put more investment into this build at this point. Having your ignites spread is the main way that you have the entire screen disappear when something finally pops. It's also really nice to scale this so that when you are on a single target using Penance Mark and you do finally kill one of those phantasms, that the ignite actually spreads to that single target you want to hit. These gloves are mostly to make up for the cold resistance that I lost from my Valyrium ring, and also just to give a ton of chaos res. For boots, I've swapped to Ralakesh's Impatience because this gives me immunity to corrupted blood, so I don't need to get that elsewhere. It gives chaos res, which I need, which is great. It gives movement speed, which is just a good stat on boots. And most importantly, it makes you count as having maximum number of endurance charges. This means that I don't need a way to actually gain endurance charges. The game will always count me as having 6, 3 base and 3 from the tree. Eventually you could upgrade some of the gear like these boots to give +1 max endurance charges, but that's expensive and I don't have the money for it. And of course I'm running Mage Blood. I got this within the first week of the league because it is such a versatile item. It makes it so that the left 4 magic utility flasks on your bar constantly apply their effects to you. This means you don't need to worry about flask charges, you don't need to worry about your flasks running out. You will just always have these effects while you're wearing this belt. It also gives a ton of dex, which is super nice. For my flasks, I'm running Cinder Swallow Urn. This has a lot of different variations, but the one that I went for is specifically that enemies ignited by you during effect have Malediction. Malediction, again, is a really good effect to apply to enemies. It also makes ignited enemies take increased damage, and I recover life when I kill an enemy during the effect. Just a nice flask to have, and it makes everything green on the screen when it dies, which is a fun MTX. I'm wearing a Quicksilver Flask with chance to ignite during effect because Quicksilver Flask is great to have while you have Mage Blood. It just makes you permanently faster. And Ignite chance because, and I didn't talk about this earlier, since you're igniting things, you want to make sure that you've got 100% chance to ignite. I have balanced my build a little bit so that I've got 102% chance to ignite, which is over 100%, which is fine. That's just where you want to be. Options you have for Ignite in this build are your Flask Suffix, you've got your weapon if you're not using a Dark Seer, you've got tattoos which you can put on strength nodes in the tree, and you've got rare jewels. Next flask is a Granite Flask, which gives Curse Immunity. It doesn't really give Curse Immunity, just reduced effect, so if you do get increased effect that can undo the immunity, but it's on a Granite Flask because that gives armor, and this build can just use more defensive layers, so I'm here for it. A Ruby Flask with a movement speed suffix. Again, movement speed, great to have. The reason for the Ruby Flask is just a ton more fire res and plus 5% to max fire res, which again is all Ellie res due to my ascendancy. Finally, a Sulfur Flask with chance to avoid being shocked during effect. This is what makes Storm Shroud allow us to have full Ellie ailment immunity. I've got 55% chance to avoid being shocked on this flask, which then has a 25% increased effect prefix and a 70% increased effect enchantment. Coming over to the defense page, you can see that I do indeed have 107% freeze avoidance, shock avoidance, and ignite avoidance. One thing to note about the Sulfur Flask is because I'm not actually activating it, I don't create Consecrated Ground, which is a little unfortunate. I do still get the increased damage from the flask effect itself, though. I showed the skills I've got on my bar, I've showed some of the skill supports, but let me go over the rest of them. In my chest, I've got Detonate Dead of Scavenging. This is a really important gem in this build because it's going to be the thing that starts creating big ignites on enemies. Once you manage to kill something with Righteous Fire, you're going to detonate dead that sucker. That's going to cause your first ignites on enemies, which are going to proliferate through the entire pack, and eventually you're going to get a Hinakora's explosion and proliferate that ignite throughout the rest of the screen. That is supported by a Swift Affliction support, Cast When Stunned support, Burning Damage support, and Unbound Ailment support. Also in this link, I've got Firestorm of Pelting, and that is just because it's in the Cast When Stunned link, so I will Cast When Stunned Firestorm of Pelting and Detonate Dead just from this chest. Firestorm of Pelting is a really nice Cast When Stunned gem to have because it just causes a lot of hits, and hits are really good for proccing Penance Mark. They're also really good for proccing Wrapped in Flame, which I talked about earlier, covering enemies in Ash. On my gloves, I've got my Malevolence linked to Eternal Blessing support, which makes it free. It makes it cost nothing, because I'm not actually reserving mana for any of my buffs. Additionally, this is where I've got Vitality and Fire Trap. In my boots, I have another Cast When Stunned support link. This one is supporting Flame Surge, which is just a ton more damage to burning enemies. Punishment, which is another curse that happens upon me for free, which also makes enemies take a ton more damage, and makes them debilitated, which makes them deal less damage and move slower. And finally, Frost Bomb to inhibit enemies' ability to regen life. So yeah, that's the build. Now, let's see what it does in action. Here I am in Jungle Valley. Let's go kill stuff. In this ritual, I can literally just stand still and wait for the things to die. That is until there's just like one totem remaining or something and I have to go hunt it down, which didn't happen this time. So that's the build, and honestly, this build video came at the perfect time because, here's a little sneak peek, I'm gonna be crafting a new build soon. And if anyone can guess what it is based on these items, drop a comment below and let me know what build it is. Those are all the hints you're getting. Bye-bye.